Today we're going to build on the last video. In the last video we had taken Magic Sculpt epoxy putty and created a base and let that harden. That will allow us to have a solid structure for us to build the neck over top of today. So we're going to be working on one side of the neck and taking more fresh Magic Sculpt and building in the structures of the neck. I like to do this by finding the shapes in the neck. So in this case I'm laying down the large bulging muscle that goes from the top of the head and the atlas bone, which you can usually feel that's just behind the horse's cheek, and goes all the way down to the base of the neck. This is really prominent in this particular horse, and you normally see it in most horses in one way or another. That muscle sticks out quite a bit. And so once I've taken this muscle and added it, I do a little bit of blending, but I don't want to lose those shapes. So I lay in the shapes the best way that I can and try to ensure to keep that structure as I work. Otherwise, I should have just laid a mat of epoxy on the entire neck and worked from that. But this way it gives me the shapes and I don't have to worry about pushing them in later. I find this a little bit easier to work. So I sped the video up a little bit. This is me adding in a little bit more of the epoxy to the different muscle groups. So I went in and added the throat area and just above the shoulder, those muscles there. So like the last video, we'd mentioned the draft collar idea where it's thick at the top, thin at the bottom, and then you put that over the horse's head. So that's showing you that the top of the horse's neck is a little bit thicker than the bottom, and then they flip that collar so that it's wider at the shoulders and then thinner at the withers. So keep that in mind as you build the structures and build those forms in the neck. I also go in and add in any joining areas. So I'll join, like I'm joining here, the cheek in where there would be wrinkles because his head is tucked a little bit. And then I will also blend the Magic Sculpt into the body on the wither area just to ensure that there isn't a gap or any kind of definitive line. I can always sand it down a little bit. And then for smoothing all this, I'm just using water in my fingers and sometimes a brush. So this is again blending into the areas where the neck meets the body, and Magic Sculpt blends beautifully in with the plastic. So you don't normally have to worry about that too much. And when you're blending with your fingers end up acting like sandpaper, which works out really well because it evens the surface out. Don't get too aggressive with blending because you don't want to lose those shapes that you'd put in earlier. And then fill in any odd areas where there might be lumps and bumps. So I didn't have enough in that crest area, so I'm going in and adding a little bit more. And you can get the blending into the body plastic done basically 95% to maybe 98% with just your fingers. And then I take a clay shaper, which is a silicone tipped, this one's the conical shape, and use that to draw in any really hard muscle definitions. So in about the crest, I go in right where that atlas bone would be because that's really prominent there. And build that shape down. And then draw in where the throat would be. And then it's always good to check your work from all angles. So you see me a few times in this video flipping the horse to look from different areas. If I'm only looking at this one side and I finish it and I set it down and let it dry, I can guarantee you that it's going to look wonky from other angles. So always with 3D sculpting, because things can so easily get out of whack so quickly, you'll want to be flipping your model and looking at it from different directions. So because this model is going to have basically an entirely resculpted face and the cheek itself will be a lot bigger than the original, I'm not too concerned about dremeling things down before I add a little bit more. I'm bulking it up, and that will actually help me blend that cheek and those wrinkles back in with the body. So I'm using that conical color shaper, and you can see how nicely it flexes, just to put in some of those wrinkles. So I don't worry too much about much. I normally dip the tool in water just to make sure it's a little bit lubricated, and then I'll go in and draw in those wrinkles. Don't worry about it being too stark for now, because I will take a cheap dollar store paintbrush, dip that in water, and then go in and smooth things out. And then I go back and forth with that technique, and I use the color shaper again, then a brush, then sometimes my fingers, and back and forth until I get the look that I'm looking for. So when you're thinking about wrinkles, think about where that flesh goes from being normal length to being squished. Wherever it's being squished is generally where you'll see wrinkles. So this guy's holding his neck up a bit in a little bit of collection, and he's got the cheek coming into that neck flesh. So if you think about your own body, think about where you would wrinkle. And then your references, of course, are great to use to see exactly where things are going to go. And then for this model as well, the top of his crest will be wrinkled, and we'll do that closer to the end of the video. And the wrinkles can be done pretty much at any point. I end up doing a little bit more to this model on the top of the neck and building in the bottom of the neck in a moment. So I actually cover up these wrinkles in a second. You can wait until the very last moment and add them kind of in at the very end. That would probably be smarter. I get a little bit excited and then get carried away. So I'll use this dollar store paintbrush with a little bit of water to smooth in where the muscles blend into each other, just to kind of take that definition out a little bit. Those tools, being the brush, will also push the epoxy around quite a bit, so be careful how much you're doing that and how aggressively you're doing it. Again, checking it from all the angles, you can see here how that base of the neck really doesn't have a lot of meat to it. So I'm about to go in and add more epoxy on top of those wrinkles. And don't be afraid to go in and add stuff in areas or take stuff out. If this had been something that I would have left to dry and realized later, I could have always just added stuff on top. Blends a little bit better if you can catch it in the moment, but don't be too concerned about it. So now I'm going back in and adding in those wrinkles again. And I'm really not using a lot of pressure on that tool at all. It's a little bit damp just so that it's not gonna try and pill that epoxy. And I'm just drawing on it very softly. The clay's still really, or the epoxy putty is still really wet and fresh, so it takes to the detail quite quickly. And I'm not using a lot of pressure on that brush either. If I really want to take detail out, that's where I use pressure. If I just want to smooth, I'll sometimes go in the opposite direction just to pull some of that epoxy into those creases and blend it out. My finger's also going in and taking out a lot of that detail that I'm putting in there, which is what I'm wanting to do, because then I go back and forth, and that's how you get really deep wrinkles and really subtle wrinkles, and you start playing with those ideas there. So this is going in and making the wrinkles on the crest. Especially in a lot of the draft breeds, you tend to get nice crinkly wrinkles up there. They just have so much flesh. So if you end up having any questions, just leave questions in the comments. If you like these videos, definitely let me know. Hit like, hit subscribe if you want to see more. There's definitely more coming as I work on this guy and get him ready for the end of ice. And happy customizing!